Today I'm going to see how much power I need in my flash to overpower the sun. When I first bought a flash, I thought it was awesome. I thought I'd be able to go out and just get some epic flash photography images outdoors and not have to worry too much about the sun. But I couldn't be further from the truth, and I did have a lot to learn. My flash at the time didn't have the high-speed sync function, and I didn't know that I needed to control the ambient light and then control the flashlight. When you're indoors, it's quite easy to get your flash working for you, but when you step outside, especially when it's sunny, you do need quite a lot of power. So I have a few different flashes to test, and I want to see in real terms what I need to get a good photograph. Now, first of all, I'm not sponsored by Godox, and I haven't been given any of these apart from the AD300. I bought all of the others with my own money, and I just want to see what I can get away with to be able to photograph in the middle of the day and compete with that sunlight. A company called Gear did send me the AD300 for review, and that is coming soon, after I've fully tested it. Also, this isn't a scientific test, just a real world test, with the light changing all of the time. So you might see the settings change around a little bit as they would in a real shoot. I'll be testing the first two with and without modifiers to see how they cope in the sunlight, and then the second two in a 90cm softbox. I have the TT350, the V860 Mark II, the AD200 and the AD300 Pro. Also, all of them have the high-speed sync function. This enables me to go above my sync speed, and I'm using the A7 III, which has a sync speed of 1/200th of a second. So I'll try them with and without the high-speed sync function, as this option does cut into the power quite a bit. So I started off with my TT350, which is an absolutely tiny flash. I had to shoot with this one on camera as it doesn't have any wireless modes, just a built-in slave mode. And my camera doesn't have a flash on the top of it, so I couldn't take advantage of that slave mode. I was really surprised by this little flash. It produced a surprising amount of power, and when used without a modifier, I was able to compete with the sun. So with the TT350, having it on camera, it actually can compete with the sun, but because it's on camera, you've got really direct, really horrible light on your subject. So that's the only problem with this flash. It's great, it's a tiny little flash, but when it is flashing on the subject, it's not that brilliant. At 1/16th power in the flash and the settings of 1/200th of a second, f4 and ISO 100, I got an evenly lit image and the flash was keeping up with the sun. And then with high-speed sync enabled at 1/2 power, I got a good exposure with a shutter speed of 1/1250th of a second, f1.8 and ISO 100. Now when I tried to diffuse it with the Rogue flash bender, this was when that lack of power really showed itself. So as soon as I put the flash bender on, this is creating a much bigger light source. So the light source is nicer, but in using 1/1 power, so using all the power in this flash, it's not quite enough. With the flash at full power, I had the settings at 1/320th of a second, high-speed sync enabled, f2.8, ISO 100, and this just about gave me a usable photo. But again, that light was still quite flat because the angle of the flash was still very similar to the angle that I was shooting at. In saying all of that, if you did wait for the golden hour, and if it was quite a hazy golden hour, so the intensity of the sun had dropped quite a bit, I think you could get some usable shots with this flash and using some kind of diffuser like the Rogue flash bender. And especially if you've got a remote trigger to fire it off camera, giving you some angle on the flashlight that you were using. Next I tried the V860 II. This has a fair bit more power than the TT350 and is about double the price. The V860 II is a decent flash, and again I was surprised at how much power it has. Without any modifiers, it was easily able to compete with the sun. First of all on camera and then off camera. On camera with high-speed sync enabled, I got a good exposure with 1/16th flash power with a shutter speed at 1/1250th, f1.8 and ISO 100. When I put the flash on a light stand, I used the same settings and got a better result. So with the camera off the flash, you can see I've got it on the light stand. I've got the flash at 1/16th power. I've got it in the HSS setting, 1/1250th of a second, f1.8, ISO 100. And this is producing quite a nice light. Now with the flash off camera, the direction of light is better, but without a softbox, the light is still hard, producing strong shadows. You can see with those settings a vast markup in the power from the TT350 to the V860 Mark II. Now I think the guide number for the TT350 is around about 35 or 36, and then the V860 Mark II is 60. So there is a definite markup in the power between these two flashes. Also, with that lithium-ion battery, the recycle times were much faster in the V860 Mark II. Now with this unit, you can use it with a trigger like the X1, the X2 or the X Pro. It's got the wireless system built in, you just have to set it right so it communicates with the trigger. Now this enabled me to get it off camera and into my softbox, and today I was using a 90cm softbox. When I put this flash in the softbox, I thought it might dissipate the power a lot more than it actually did. But it did compete with the sun, and it did really keep up with it quite well. So I've got the softbox on now. I've had to increase the power of the V860 Mark II to half power. I've still got my settings at 1/1250th of a second, f2, ISO 100. So the V860 Mark II can really cope with that sunlight. So I'm using the sunlight as a hair light and the V860 as a key light, and it seems to be working really well in the 90cm softbox. And I've got double diffusion in this as well. I'm actually really surprised with this, and yeah, it's proving to be a really good flash. Without the high-speed sync enabled, I had it on half power with the settings of 1/200th of a second, f5.6 and ISO 100. This gave me a good exposure with my subject at about 4 foot from the flash head. So if you do own this flash, get a softbox, a light stand and a trigger, and you can get some great shots even in the midday sun. Next I'm going to try the AD200, so I'm just going to switch it out with the V860 and then see how much better this does than the V860. The great thing with this is that it has two different heads to give you two different light spreads. With the Fresnel head, without high-speed sync enabled, I could get a good exposure with 1/16th power. I had the shutter speed at 1/200th of a second, my aperture at f4.5 and an ISO of 100. With high-speed sync enabled, I had to get the flash to full power at 1/2000th of a second, f2 and ISO 100. And this gave a good exposure. I then swapped the Fresnel head out with the bulb head and got a good exposure with the flash set to half power. I had the shutter speed at 1/200th of a second, I had it f4.5 and ISO 100. With high-speed sync enabled, I had to increase it to full power on that flash, and I got a good exposure with a shutter speed of 1/1250th of a second, f2 and ISO at 160. So this really does show you how much more power you need with the high-speed sync mode enabled in the AD200. Also, with the bulb in the AD200, you have to increase that power again. So if you're using the bulb and high-speed sync mode, you pretty much have to shoot at full power when taking photographs in the middle of the day. Lastly, I tried the AD300. This is marketed as an outdoor flash, and I did wonder how much better it could be compared to the AD200. Now this really does stand up to the name of an outdoor flash. It has plenty of power, and the bulb really does give a nice soft look to it when in a decent softbox. At 1/8 power with a shutter speed of 1/200th of a second, an aperture of f7.1 and ISO 100, I was able to get a good exposure. So you can see with this bigger flash with a lot more power, you can really drop that power in the flash and still compete with the sun. Because I was only using 1/8 power, this gave me really short recycle times, and it was to the point where I didn't have to worry about it too much, and I could take multiple shots in a sequence. Also, with a smaller amount of power needed for every single flash, the battery would last a lot longer. Now with an aperture of f7.1 to get a good exposure, this doesn't blur the background too much. So if you do want a more blurry background, you would have to use an ND filter or enable high-speed sync mode. With a 3-stop ND filter, you would be able to open the aperture to around about f2.8 and get the same exposure. With the high-speed sync enabled, to get a good exposure, I had to increase the power to 1/4, with the settings of 1/1250th of a second, f1.8 and an ISO of 100. So even when high-speed sync is enabled, I still didn't have to use full power. Now this was a really fun test to do, and one thing this has shown me is that it doesn't take much to overpower the sun with a flash. However, when you want to diffuse the light and get a nice soft light on your subject, you do have to get a bigger unit with more power, because that softbox dissipates that light quite a lot. If you have something like the TT350, this is limited in its uses outside. If this is all you have, I'd get a Rogue flash bender and an off-camera trigger, and then shoot around sunrise and sunset to be able to compete with the sun. In that midday sunlight, it really did struggle. And also with just 2 AA batteries in it, it really did struggle with power. And the recycle times were getting longer and longer the more shots that I took. The V860 Mark II did a really good job and was able to keep up with the sun quite easily. However, that light source was still quite harsh even through double diffusion because of that Fresnel head, even when zoomed out to 24mm. After a while, the recycle times did start to get longer, and every now and then I had some dark frames where the flash didn't fire and it was still recharging. The 8200 also did a good job with the Fresnel head, and I was able to use a lower power setting than the V860 Mark II. With the bulb head, I did have to crank up the power, but the quality of the light was much better. So with the 8200 using that bulb, you will burn through a lot more battery power. Finally, with the 8300, this really did stand up to its name. It's an outdoor flash head, and it does produce a really nice soft light that can easily compete with the sun in a 90cm softbox with double diffusion. In the midday sun, I was able to get a good exposure with 1/8 to 1/4 power. So the better quality of flash that you want outdoors in your photos, the bigger the flash head you will have to get. But if you can't afford these more expensive flashes, you can get some good shots, but you will have to wait for an overcast day, or you'll have to wait to shoot at sunset or sunrise before that sunlight gets too bright. Now, have you had any experiences in shooting outdoors with speedlights or flashes? If so, let me know in the comments below. It'll be great to hear about your experiences. And if you want to learn more about photography, click on this video next. Or if you want to binge watch a load of my photography tutorials, click down here. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for weekly tutorials in photography and videography. I'll see you next time.